Before ancient walls, a man stood with nothing but faith and a trumpet. The mighty walls of Jericho fell, not by force, but by the sound of belief. Was it truly a divine miracle, or could science hold part of the answer? Archaeologists have found signs of earthquakes, but can reason explain the supernatural? In this story, faith and science walk side by side, searching for the truth hidden beneath the rubble. In the beginning, God said, "Let there be light." And there was. With a single command, the universe was born, not in chaos, but in precision. Galaxies swirled into place, atoms aligned, and natural laws were etched into reality like fingerprints on glass. This was no random event. It was design. It was intention. It was power beyond comprehension. But what if the very laws we study today, gravity, time, space, energy, are not separate from God, but reflections of His voice at the moment of creation? What if science is not the enemy of faith, but one of its languages? Throughout history, science and religion have been portrayed as adversaries. One seeks proof. The other demands belief. Yet the deeper we go into the structure of the cosmos, the more we find order, beauty, and logic that hint at something greater. Every scientific law has a beginning. Every formula follows a path. And every path, if we trace it long enough, seems to echo a design far older than mankind. The book of Genesis doesn't describe how the laws of thermodynamics came to be, but it does show us a God who separates light from darkness, water from land, order from void. That same God may have embedded laws into nature so precise that they govern stars and cells alike. Albert Einstein once said, "The more I study science, the more I believe in God." He wasn't alone. Many great thinkers have found faith not in the absence of logic, but within it. The miracle of creation may not be just the event itself, but the fact that it follows such elegant mathematical rules. When we see the Earth rotating at just the right speed, the distance from the Sun perfectly calculated for life, or DNA coding instructions like ancient scripture, we are not looking at randomness. We are witnessing a divine equation. God did not create the universe and abandon it to spin. He wrote its laws, set its boundaries, and remains within them, not limited, but revealed. His miracles, like the fall of Jericho, may use nature as a canvas, but the brush is still His. And what is nature, if not the handwriting of God? Even the human mind, capable of questioning, calculating, imagining, is evidence of something more. Why are we the only creatures who ask, why? Why does beauty move us? Why does music stir the soul? These are not biological glitches. They are signs of design, whispers of the Creator behind the curtain. So when we ask, can science and God coexist? Maybe we're asking the wrong question. Maybe they were never separate. Maybe science is just the study of the system God put in motion. A system that sometimes allows earthquakes to bring down walls, and other times uses faith and sound to do the same. In the story of Jericho, trumpets sound, people shout, and the walls fall. Some scientists point to seismic activity, to structural weaknesses, to natural phenomena. But none can explain the timing, the exact moment those walls fell, after days of silent marching and obedience. Coincidence? Or divine coordination through natural law? This chapter isn't about proving God with equations. It's about seeing His shadow in the logic. It is about understanding that from the first spark of creation to the laws that hold atoms together, science may be a mirror reflecting a divine face we've only begun to recognize. God is not threatened by microscopes or telescopes. He created what they observe. And in that, perhaps, lies the greatest miracle of all. What if the universe is not a random explosion of matter, but a composition crafted like a symphony, each note representing a law, each pause a divine breath? The more humanity uncovers through science, the clearer it becomes. The natural world is structured by laws so precise, so consistent, that even the slightest variation would make life impossible. Gravity, electromagnetism, nuclear forces, orbital mechanics, none of these arose by accident. They operate like clockwork, as if someone wound them with infinite precision. And perhaps someone did. For believers, these laws are not proof against God. They are the very fingerprints of God. Isaac Newton once said, "Gravity explains the motions of the planets, but it cannot explain who sets the planets in motion." Newton saw the laws of physics not as rivals to faith, but as windows into the divine. In his view, science didn't threaten belief, it strengthened it. Consider water. Its molecular structure, its behavior under temperature, its ability to sustain life. If the angle between the hydrogen atoms were slightly different, water wouldn't exist as we know it. If gravity were a fraction weaker or stronger, stars couldn't form, galaxies wouldn't hold, planets couldn't orbit. This isn't chaos, it's code. So where does this code come from? Laws, by definition, imply a lawgiver. Rules suggest a ruler. When we marvel at the consistency of the universe, why electrons orbit in predictable paths, why light bends through space, why the speed of light is constant, we're not just observing nature. We're listening to its designer speak through structure. God could have chosen chaos, but he chose order. And that order reveals something deeper. A God not only of power, but of wisdom, patience, and intention. A God who doesn't need to defy the laws he made, but who can use them to perform what we call miracles. Because he authored the system, he knows exactly how to move within it. Take earthquakes, for example. They're the result of tectonic shifts, pressure building between plates until it violently releases. But timing is everything. What if, in Jericho, God used a tremor known, predictable by his eternal knowledge, to collapse the walls just as the people shouted? Is it less of a miracle if God used the natural order he himself created? When we understand that God created the laws, we stop seeing science and faith as opposites. We begin to see science as a divine language, one we are just beginning to translate. In fact, the existence of laws at all is a theological statement. Why should nature be consistent? Why doesn't gravity vary from place to place? Why is the speed of light fixed? These aren't arbitrary numbers. They're signs of a mind behind the material. The atheist might say, it just is. But the believer sees purpose, pattern, personality. And that's the key, personality. Behind the precision, there is heart. The same God who wrote the equations of the cosmos also formed the soul. He who governs galaxies is not distant. He is present, intimate, listening to prayers while supernovas explode millions of light years away. That is why the laws of nature don't contradict miracles. They make them more astonishing. That God would step into his own design, work within its boundaries, and reveal his presence through the very structure he authored, speaks to a level of genius we cannot fathom. Miracles aren't a suspension of the natural order. They are moments when the author of the order touches the page with his own hand. And the more we study the universe, the more we find that the page is filled with his handwriting. So when science explains how the walls of Jericho could fall, we don't dismiss the divine. We recognize that God may have chosen to act through natural forces, using his perfect knowledge of the world he built. Just as a composer knows every instrument in the orchestra, God knows every force, every atom, every fault line beneath the earth, and sometimes he chooses to play them. In perfect time with faith. The city of Jericho stood like a fortress against the horizon, its walls thick, its gates sealed, its soldiers confident. It was a symbol of power and defiance, seemingly impossible to conquer. But then came the march. 7 days circling the walls in silence until the final day when trumpets blared, voices rose, and the impossible happened. The walls collapsed. To the faithful, it was a miracle. To skeptics, it was a myth. But what if both faith and fact point to something extraordinary, something divine, working through the natural? According to the book of Joshua, no siege weapons were used. No catapults, no fire, no battering rams, only sound. Only obedience, only faith. On the seventh day, with a blast of trumpets and a unified shout, the fortified walls crumbled. For centuries, scholars debated the story's authenticity until archaeology began whispering truths buried beneath the dust. In the 1930s, British archaeologist John Garstang excavated Jericho and made a startling discovery, evidence of a sudden and violent collapse. Decades later, another renowned archaeologist, Kathleen Kenyon, led a more detailed dig. She found layers of destruction, charred bricks, and collapsed walls. Some of the evidence seemed to date before the supposed time of Joshua. Others pointed to seismic activity. Her conclusion? A powerful earthquake may have caused the destruction. An earthquake. Suddenly, the mystery deepens. What if the sound of trumpets and shouting wasn't the physical cause of the collapse, but the spiritual trigger? An act of obedience perfectly synchronized with a natural event that God Himself set in motion? Seismologists have confirmed that the Jordan Rift Valley, where Jericho lies, is prone to earthquakes. Over the centuries, tremors have rocked the region. It's not impossible to imagine that one struck just as the Israelites circled the city for the seventh time. But here's the question: what are the odds? What are the odds that an earthquake would occur precisely on the seventh day, at the exact moment the people shouted? What are the odds that it would strike with just enough force to bring down the city walls, but not destroy the Israelites standing nearby? This is where the natural meets the supernatural. Miracles are often imagined as violations of the laws of nature. But what if, instead, they are perfect applications of them executed with such precise timing that only a divine intelligence could coordinate them? If God authored creation, then He authored the physics behind earthquakes. He knows the tension beneath the earth's crust, the fault lines that wait silently. He could have triggered the quake days earlier or days later. But He chose that moment when the people believed, obeyed, and raised their voices in unison. The miracle, then, may not be the collapse itself, but the timing of the collapse. That's where science and faith align. Science may explain how the walls fell, but only faith explains why they fell when they did. And it goes deeper. Kenyon also discovered jars of grain among the ruins intact, unlooted. In ancient times, grain was treasure. Conquering armies took it first, but at Jericho it remained. Why? Because the city fell so suddenly, there was no time to plunder. And the Israelites, following God's command, burned the city without taking spoil. This detail matches the biblical account perfectly, not just in theology, but in archaeology. These pieces of evidence don't erase the miracle, they illuminate it. God's intervention in Jericho may have used an earthquake, but earthquakes don't respond to trumpets unless the trumpets are part of a divine appointment. It's not the tremor that's miraculous, it's the choreography. To the modern mind, it's tempting to say, see? Science explains it. No need for God. But that view misses the greater wonder. It's like seeing a clock tick perfectly and assuming there's no watchmaker. God does not always break the rules of nature. Sometimes He uses them beautifully, powerfully, invisibly. And sometimes He uses His creation to answer faith. In Jericho, the earth may have moved, but faith shook the heavens first. In the quiet hills of Galilee and along the shores of the Jordan, something extraordinary unfolded, acts so intimate yet so powerful. They still echo through time. A man touched the untouchable, spoke to the wind, and called the dead to life. His name was Jesus. His miracles are among the most profound in all of Scripture. But could these miracles have a connection to the natural world? Could the science we know today hint at mechanisms behind the wonders? without ever removing the hand of God. Let's begin with the first miracle at a wedding in Cana. The celebration was joyous until the wine ran out. Jesus, prompted by his mother, asked for jars of water. Moments later, that water became wine. For centuries, theologians have called it a symbol of transformation. But what if, on a deeper level, it was also a transformation of matter, one that defies human ability, but not divine intelligence? Turning water into wine would require rearranging molecules, adding sugars, alcohols, flavor compounds instantly. Science calls this impossible. But quantum physicists acknowledge that matter, at its smallest level, is energy held in patterns. Could the one who created the universe not simply rewrite those patterns with a word? Or consider the feeding of the 5,000. Jesus took 5 loaves and 2 fish and multiplied them. The crowd was fed with leftovers. From a scientific perspective, this violates the law of conservation of mass. But what if divine power inserted mass where none existed? Modern physics does not fully explain the origin of mass or how particles gain it, yet it happens constantly at the quantum level. A miracle, then, could be the sudden presence of that which previously wasn't, not by illusion, but by creative authority. Still, the miracles of Jesus weren't only material, they were deeply personal. He healed the blind with mud and touch. He cured lepers with a word. He calmed a storm by rebuking the wind and waves. Some skeptics say these were psychosomatic placebo effects, misdiagnosed conditions, exaggerated stories. But let's ask a different question. Why did these events happen with such perfect precision? Why was the healing always instant, complete, and irreversible? Modern medicine marvels at neuroplasticity, spontaneous remissions, and the power of the mind over the body. But none of these explain a man regaining sight after years in darkness, or skin being restored in moments. They're hints, but they don't answer the whole. And then, there's the resurrection of Lazarus. 4 days in the tomb. Decay had begun. The body had passed the point of return. But Jesus did not just pray. He commanded, "Lazarus, come forth." And life responded. The heart beat. Blood flowed. Muscles strengthened. No defibrillator. No surgery. Just the voice of the one who breathed stars into existence. Scientists can explain what death is, but they cannot reverse it. In this moment, the laws of biology were not broken. They were overruled by the one who wrote them. What unites all these miracles is not only their wonder, but their purpose. Jesus never performed miracles as mere spectacle. Each one revealed his authority, his compassion, and his divine identity. They were not magic tricks, they were signs. Not proof of manipulation, but of restoration. Where there was lack, he provided. Where there was disease, he healed. Where there was death, he gave life. Science searches for mechanisms. But miracles are not about how, they're about who. Some argue that if we find a scientific explanation, the miracle loses its meaning. But that's not true. A miracle is not less miraculous if it involves natural processes. It's more. Because it shows that God's power flows through the system he created, not outside of it. He doesn't need to violate the laws of nature. He is the Lord of them. Just as a skilled musician can use every note within a scale to create a masterpiece, God uses the rhythms of creation to play a melody we call the miraculous. The miracles of Jesus continue to inspire wonder because they touch something deeper than logic. They awaken hope. They stir faith. And even if one day we understand the chemistry behind water becoming wine, or the physics of walking on water, the heart of the miracle remains untouched. A loving God chose to intervene. Science may explain the frame, but only faith reveals the artist.